Having a pluralistic disposition to difference, demonstrating respect, also requires paying attention to a risk that we all face when we're working with other people called the communication gap. When I come into a situation, I will express myself using words, and usually those words are just limited. I'll say something about the situation. And when I say those words, I'm saying those words with a certain intention. When I share something with someone, there's an intention I have in sharing those words, that perspective. And my intention is based on a really rich and complex story I have about the situation, the person I'm interacting with, the way the world is, what's going on, what's important, all kinds of things. Our story, as we talked about earlier. The challenge in communication is that when I say some words to describe something to someone or to share my perspective with someone, they only hear the words. But they don't understand, they don't have access to the rich, complicated story of mine that's informing what I mean by those words. So the intention that I have may not be the same as the impact those words have. And what's happening is that the person that's hearing me is interpreting my words from their own really rich and complex story, a story that I don't have access to. A few days ago, I was getting ready for work in the morning. And my wife, both of us have very busy lives, and so she came into the room and she said to me, "You're dressed up today." And then she left. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know if that was a statement, "You're dressed up today, period," or if there was a question mark behind that, "You're dressed up today." I didn't know if she was being sarcastic because we were arguing about something and she was making a comment on me, or if she was wondering why I'm dressed up today. My wife, she's my wife. I live with her. We have complex histories and shared stories about so many things. And yet she gave me these few words, and I was like, oh my goodness, what meaning do I make of those words? The intention she had in saying those words to me did not align with the impact. I'm guessing she didn't want me to be confused by saying that. She probably was telling me that in some kind of kind way, saying, "You look very nice today." But I wasn't sure if that was actually going on. That intention was hidden to me. We had a communication gap. I was interpreting things from my story, which may include the argument we had the night before or other kinds of things. And she was sharing those comments with her story, which again, I'm blind to. And we haven't discussed it offhand, so I don't actually know what that story was. But notice, two intimate people who have shared stories are still at risk of a communication gap. So you can imagine when two strangers come together and share just a few words about their perspectives, how big a risk it is that what they intend doesn't actually align with the impact that it has. So what we need then is to be aware when we're working with other people of the risk of this communication gap and work really hard to listen to each other loudly by asking questions, reframing, probing, things that we do in the deep listening context to fill in that gap, to minimize the risk that we're going to be miscommunicating. The skills related to a pluralistic approach to difference and emotional intelligence become especially important in a problem-solving context when we're trying to understand what are the things that matter here, what are at stake, what's at stake, how do we prioritize what's important, and why we should prioritize what's important, and what the facts in a situation are. It's in these spaces that making room for people to share their perspectives in the problem-solving context becomes really, really important, because that's where the values that are going to guide the actual solution become surfaced. It's pluralism and emotional intelligence are important throughout the moral reasoning and decision-making and problem-solving process, but it's especially when we're trying to identify values and prioritize values that we want to make sure we're paying good attention to creating space for people to share what's in their hearts and in their minds about the situation that we're dealing with.